Francisco, Juliana, and their parents happily arrived at a restaurant to eat donuts. While they were looking at the menu, they noticed something curious at the next table. A father was bringing 2 donuts to one of his children, while the other child, seeing that his brother had 2 donuts, burst into tears. Francisco and Juliana frowned.
That's unfair.
He is giving 2 donuts to one and nothing to the other child.
Dad, suspecting there was more to the story, watched carefully. When the other family finished their meal and was about to leave, he approached the children's father and asked,
"Excuse me, but I noticed something and I'm curious. Why did you give 2 donuts to only one of your children?"
When he returned to the table, he explained what he had discovered. The father had bought a donut for each son, but while one of them went to the bathroom, the brother ate his brother's donut without anyone seeing him. The father's discompose was not out of malice, but because he wanted to teach him a lesson. By giving 2 donuts to the one who had not committed the fault, the father was showing justice, although from the outside it looked a little different. Do you know that something similar happens with the wrath of God? From our limited vision, God's wrath can be difficult to understand, but when we discover the whole story, we understand that God's wrath arises directly from His love. Sabbath School LIKE presents the series God's Love and His Justice. Lesson 5, The Wrath of Divine Love. If we were to take a survey entitled The Love of God versus the Wrath of God, asking people which of these 2 biblical expressions of God do you like better, undoubtedly the love of God would win by a wide margin. But the truth is that that comparison does not apply in this case. Such comparison starts from the human idea that love and anger are 2 opposite things. That's wrong. The loving God gets angry at evil precisely because He is love. For some, the God of the Old Testament is a God of wrath, and the God of the New Testament is a God of love. But Jesus Himself expressed a deep anger against evil, and the New Testament records numerous times God's righteous anger against injustice. So this week's question is, what does the Bible teach us about the wrath of divine love? First, God's wrath is not arbitrary. Have you ever seen a soccer referee give a red card and the players of one team celebrating while those of the other team claim what seems to them to be an injustice?
Yes. My brother always says that referees are unfair.
And sometimes they are. They don't seem to see the other team's fouls.
Well, the referee, with some exceptions, doesn't give the red card because he's in a bad mood or because he doesn't like a player. In that case, he would be an arbitrary referee. He gives the red card because there are clear rules and because his duty is to protect all the players. Well, God is not a soccer referee. He is the referee of the universe. His justice is never arbitrary. And of course, neither is His wrath. God doesn't get angry on a whim. When God sent the plagues on Egypt, did He do it out of arbitrary anger? No, He did it because Pharaoh refused to free the people of Israel who were suffering from slavery. When God allowed Nebuchadnezzar to take the Jews captive to Babylon, did He do it out of arbitrary anger? No. 2 Chronicles 36:16 says that they despised His words, mocking His prophets, until the anger of the Lord arose against His people, and there was no remedy. And as we said, we do not see this only in the Old Testament. When Jesus overturned the tables in the temple, did He do it out of arbitrary anger? No, He did it because they had turned the temple into a den of thieves to take advantage of widows, orphans, and the poor. Mark says that He became displeased when the disciples prevented them from bringing the children to Him, and that when the Pharisees were waiting for Jesus to heal someone to accuse Him of breaking the Sabbath, He looked at them with anger, grieved at the hardness of their hearts, and proceeded to heal the man. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. If we think about it, God's wrath is not against people, but against sin, because sin hurts both the one who commits the sin and the one who suffers the consequences of sin. Secondly, it is slow to anger. If the time it takes you to get angry was proportional to the length of your nose, how big a nose would you be?
I take a long time to get angry, so I would have a long nose.
I would have it a little shorter.
Well, curiously enough, the Hebrew phrase translated as slow to anger or longanaime could be literally translated as long nose. In the Hebrew language, anger was metaphorically associated with the nose, and the length of the nose represented the time it took for one to become angry. Therefore, references to God as long-nosed seek to convey the idea that He is patient and slow to anger. God Himself introduced Himself thus to Moses.
The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness.
Psalm 78 shows what some scholars call the cycle of rebellion. The people rebelled against God, sometimes going so far as to do such awful things as child sacrifice. God, in His anger, removed the protection He had over them. The people were oppressed by their enemies. That they cried out to God for deliverance. God turned away His wrath and delivered them. Then the people rebelled against God again. Do you know how many times that happens in the Old Testament? Many times. And no matter what they did, as long as they sought God from their hearts, the Lord turned away His wrath. In fact, God is so slow to anger, which was something that upset Prophet Jonah. God sent him to pronounce His judgments against the great city of Nineveh. Jonah tried to flee to Tarshish. God would not let him. His disobedience led him to be thrown into the sea, swallowed by a fish, and vomited on land. Finally, Jonah went to Nineveh to preach to the Ninevites that God would destroy them in 40 days. But the Ninevites repented, cried out to God, and converted. What did God do? He turned away His wrath and forgave them. How did Jonah react? He cried out to God.
That is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love.
Did you notice? God is long-nosed. He is patient because His desire is not to destroy us, but to save us. And third, one day there will be no more need for God's wrath. Have you ever thought of things that only exist because they depend on another?
Yes. Like shadow, there is no shadow if there is no light.
Or smoke, which does not exist if there is no fire.
That's right. The shadow disappears if you take away the light, and the smoke clears away if you put out the fire. Well, something similar happens with the wrath of God. Its existence depends on the presence of sin. When sin is eradicated, God's wrath will automatically cease to exist because there will no longer be evil to confront or injustice to correct. Peter wrote, according to his promise, we look for new heavens and a new earth wherein dwelleth righteousness. And if there is no unrighteousness, there is no wrath of God. Remember the story of the father who gave 2 donuts to one of his sons. From the outside, it seemed unfair. But when we learned the full story, we understood that his anger was not arbitrary, but a just reaction to right the wrong. So too is God's wrath. Today we learned that first, His wrath is never capricious. Second, He is slow to anger because His greatest desire is to save us. And third, one day, when sin is eradicated, His wrath will disappear because there will be no more evil to fight. But listen up. Let us not use God's wrath as an excuse to be vengeful or impatient, but as a call to reflect His character. Apostle James calls us to be long-nosed, that is, slow to anger as God is. Therefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. Has this study blessed you? You too can be part of this mission to teach the Bible in a creative and transforming way. Scan the QR code you see on the screen and support us so that more people can discover God's love and justice. Remember that together we can grow more.